Clear out your office by noon. My manager said it loud enough for the whole floor to hear. We're done here, Ethan. I set down my coffee. 22 people were pretending to look at their screens. I could feel it. That specific kind of silence where everyone is holding their breath and nobody wants to be the one who makes eye contact. My name is Ethan Mercer, and in that moment, standing in the middle of Callaway Medical Group's 4th floor, with my manager's voice still bouncing off the glass partition walls, I did the one thing she didn't expect. I smiled. Not a big smile. Not a smirk. Just a quiet, small thing at the corner of my mouth that I couldn't help. Because she had no idea. She genuinely had no idea what she'd just done. Understood, I said. My manager. I'll call her what she was. My manager, nothing more. Crossed her arms and leaned against the edge of my desk like she owned it. In her mind, she did. She'd been acting like it for 8 months. I'll need your badge and your laptop before you leave the building. Of course, I said. I opened my desk drawer and took out 3 things: a small leather notebook, a thumb drive, and a photograph of my father that I'd kept there since my first week. I left everything else. The stapler, the coffee mug someone had given me at last year's holiday party, the stack of sticky notes, none of it mattered. What I didn't take out of that drawer was the one thing she didn't know existed. A sealed envelope with the firm's registered agent address printed in the top left corner. It had been sitting there for 11 months, and I'd never needed to open it. Until now. People were whispering as I walked toward the elevator. I heard fragments. Did she really just... And I thought he was the one who... And then nothing, because the elevator doors closed and I was alone. I pressed the lobby button and exhaled slowly. She thought she was cleaning house. What she was actually doing was lighting the fuse on something she'd never seen coming. By tomorrow morning, she wouldn't be making decisions about anyone's office. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to a storage facility about 12 minutes from the Callaway building. A climate-controlled unit I'd been renting for the past 14 months under a name most people at the firm had never heard. My father's name. James Harlow. My name is Ethan Mercer, because that's my mother's side. My father, James Harlow, founded Callaway Medical Group 23 years ago with 2 other men and a loan he'd taken against the house I grew up in. He ran the company quietly, the way he did everything. He was never the face of it. That was always the other partner's job. My father was the infrastructure, the one who built the systems, negotiated the vendor contracts, secured the real estate, and made sure payroll never missed a cycle. He died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. What most people at Callaway didn't know, what my manager certainly didn't know, was that my father left me his stake. Not a small stake, not a token inheritance. 38% of Callaway Medical Group, transferred to me through a trust structured so quietly that even the other partners hadn't fully absorbed what it meant. I had spent the months since his death doing exactly what he would have done. Watching, learning, taking notes, not announcing myself. I walked into my father's storage unit and sat down on a folding chair in front of a filing cabinet. Inside were 14 months of documentation, every decision my manager had made, every contract she'd steered toward vendors she had undisclosed relationships with, every performance review she'd falsified, including the 3 she'd written about me. Each one designed to build a paper trail that would justify exactly what she did this morning. She had been planning to fire me for months. I had been planning for her to try. I opened my laptop and sent a single email to 2 people. One was my attorney. The other was a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been a board member at Callaway for 11 years and who had, just 3 weeks ago, quietly reached out to me through a mutual contact to say that she had concerns about the direction of the company's operations division. The subject line was 2 words. It's time. The attachment was a folder containing 47 documents. I closed the laptop, locked the unit, and drove home. I made dinner. I watched half of a baseball game. I went to bed before 10. The next morning, I wore my father's watch, a simple steel case thing he'd bought the year the company turned profitable. I hadn't worn it since the funeral. It felt right today. I walked through the front entrance of Callaway Medical Group at 8:51 a.m. The receptionist at the front desk looked up and her face did something complicated. She'd been there 7 years. She knew me. She also knew I'd been walked out the day before. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning, Ethan." I signed in. Used my personal ID, not the badge I'd surrendered. I had every right to be in the building. I was about to have more right to be there than anyone else. My manager came out of the elevator at 9:04. She was carrying her usual cold brew and had her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me until she was about 4 feet away. When she did, she stopped walking mid-stride. She lowered her phone. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't a question. It was the specific tone people use when they're trying to sound calm, but their voice is already cracking at the foundation. "I have a 9:15, I said. "You don't work here anymore. I'm not here as an employee." She started to say something. I could see her trying to figure out which angle to come from. But before she got there, the door to the main conference room opened and Patricia Osei stepped out. Behind her was a man I recognized as Calloway's outside legal counsel, and next to him was one of the 2 remaining original partners, a man named Douglas, who had always been quieter than his title suggested. Patricia looked at my manager with the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and is no longer interested in discussing it. "Diane," she said. That was her name. "Diane, we need you to come in." "What is this?" Diane's voice had gone flat. "This is a board review session. Ethan, please come in as well." The conference room was arranged differently than usual. The chairs on one side were full. The chairs on the other side had 2 seats. Patricia gestured for me to take one. Diane stood at the threshold for a moment, then walked in and sat down. I watched her eyes move around the room, doing the math. 6 people. She knew most of them. She was trying to figure out what version of events she was walking into. Patricia placed the folder on the table in front of her. "We've reviewed documentation submitted to the board regarding operations under your management over the past 14 months, she said. "Specifically, vendor contracts in the Southwest Division, performance review records for 3 employees, and a pattern of procurement decisions that appear to have involved undisclosed financial relationships." Diane's jaw tightened. "Those are serious allegations." "They're documented findings," Patricia said. "Ethan, would you like to speak to the provenance of the documentation?" I leaned forward slightly. I looked at Diane directly. "Everything in that folder came from internal systems," I said. "Emails you sent on company servers, contracts you signed, vendor correspondence that was CC'd to shared inboxes. I didn't manufacture anything. I collected what was already there." Diane's eyes were very still now. I recognized the look. It was the same look she'd given me on the floor yesterday, just before she told me to clear out my office. The look of someone who believes they have control of the room. But the room had already changed around her. "On what authority?" she said carefully. "Were you collecting internal company records as a terminated employee?" Douglas cleared his throat from the far end of the table. He hadn't spoken yet. He had a particular way of choosing his moments, something I'd observed in him over the past year and always respected. Ethan wasn't collecting them as an employee, he said. He was reviewing them as a stakeholder. Diane turned to look at him. "James Harlow's trust transferred a 38% ownership stake to Ethan Mercer 14 months ago," Douglas continued, "which means that as of this moment, and as of every moment prior, including yesterday morning, Ethan has had more standing in this building than most of the people currently sitting in this room." I watched the color drain out of Diane's face. Not quickly. It happened in stages, like watching someone realize mid-sentence that the ground they're standing on isn't solid. "You're James's son," I said. "Yes." She looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time. "You never said anything." "I didn't need to," I said. "I wanted to see how the company ran when nobody was watching the stakeholders. Now I know." Douglas nodded at the 2 people near the door. Security. Calloway's own internal security team, both of whom I had spoken to quietly the day before. They stepped forward. "Diane," Patricia said, "your access credentials have been suspended pending the completion of this review. We'll need your devices." Diane stood up slowly. Her voice when she finally spoke was very quiet. "This isn't. Please don't," Patricia said. I watched her leave the room. I had spent 11 months preparing for that exit, and now that it was happening, I didn't feel the surge of satisfaction I'd expected. What I felt was something closer to tired. Tired and sad and a little bit hollow in the way you feel when something you never wanted to be true turns out to be true anyway. She had been my father's hire. He brought her in from a competing firm 6 years ago because he believed in her instincts. He told me that once over the phone, one of our last real conversations before he got sick. She's sharp, Ethan. She just needs the right structure around her. He was wrong, and he wasn't here to know it. And there was nothing satisfying about that. I spent the next 4 hours in that conference room, going through the documentation with Patricia, Douglas, and the legal team. The vendor relationship issue was worse than I'd initially mapped out. 2 contracts totaling just over $400,000 had been directed toward a logistics company with a managing partner who was Diane's former brother-in-law. The relationship wasn't disclosed anywhere in the company's conflict of interest filings. And then we got to the thing that made me put down my pen and sit back. Patricia slid a document across the table. Before we go further, I want you to see this. It was a consulting agreement, dated 9 months ago. The party of the second part was a firm called Meridian Advisory Group. I didn't recognize the name. What is this? I asked. We found it in Diane's files during this morning's access audit, Patricia said. Meridian Advisory Group was incorporated 14 months ago. It has one client on record, a private equity firm called Bridgeport Capital Partners. I looked up. Bridgeport Capital has been in acquisition discussions with 2 of our largest competitors, Douglas said. For the past year, someone has been providing them with internal operational data from Callaway. Pricing structures, patient volume projections, contract renewal timelines. The room was very quiet. Diane was feeding them information, I said. We believe so, Patricia said. But here's the part that concerns me more. She pointed to a line near the bottom of the consulting agreement. A signature. Authorized by R. Callaway, managing partner. I went still. R. Callaway. Robert Callaway, the 3rd original partner. The one whose name was on the building. He had been largely absent from day-to-day operations for the past 3 years, nominally retired. Still holding a significant ownership stake, I thought about my father, about the conversations he'd had in the last weeks of his life, the ones he'd tried to have with me, and that I hadn't fully listened to because I was too busy trying to pretend he wasn't dying. There are things about the company I should have handled years ago, he'd said, people I trusted who I shouldn't have. I had assumed he was talking about Diane. Get me Robert, I said. Nobody moved for a moment. Get me Robert Callaway on the phone, I said again quietly, right now. He arrived in person instead, 20 minutes later, which told me Patricia had already been in contact with him before this morning's meeting. He was 71, silver-haired, dressed the way he always dressed. Blazer, no tie, the casual authority of a man who'd spent decades not needing to prove anything. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. I wondered when this day would come, he said. How long? I asked. 18 months. Same timeline as my father's illness. You approached Bridgeport while my father was dying, I said. Your father and I had a disagreement about the company's future, Robert said. He wasn't defensive. He had the composure of someone who'd decided years ago to own his choices. He wanted to keep it independent. I believed a strategic acquisition was the right path. When it became clear he wouldn't be persuaded, I made other arrangements. You tried to sell the company out from under him while he was in hospice. The room was absolutely still. Robert met my eyes. I'm sorry about your father, Ethan. I genuinely am. He was my partner for 20 years. But business and grief are separate things. They're not, I said. And you know that. That's why you used Diane as the intermediary. Because you didn't want your name on it. Because on some level you knew what you were doing was wrong. He didn't answer that. I reached into my folio and placed a single document on the table in front of him. This is a demand letter from my legal team. It outlines 3 specific breaches of the operating agreement, the same agreement you, my father, and Douglas signed when the firm was incorporated, including the clause requiring majority stakeholder consent for any acquisition discussions involving external parties. He looked at the document without touching it. You have 2 options, I said. The first is that we handle this privately, through the process outlined in that letter, and you exit the company with the terms we've specified. The second is that we proceed with formal legal and regulatory filings, which will include disclosure to the state medical board, since several of the contracts involved with Bridgeport touched patient data licensing. Robert was quiet for a long moment. "You're your father's son," he said finally. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just a fact. "I know," I said. He picked up the document. 2 days later, I was sitting in my father's old office, a room I hadn't been in since we cleaned it out after he died, when I received a message on my personal phone from a number I didn't recognize. No name, no context. "You think it's over. You missed something." I stared at the screen for a long time. I'm not going to pretend the message didn't unsettle me. It did. Not because I was scared. I'd spent 14 months preparing and the major pieces were already in motion. Robert's exit process was underway. Diane's access had been revoked. The vendor contracts were being unwound. But that message was specific in a way that random intimidation usually isn't. You missed something. Not a threat. Not a warning. Information. I forwarded it to my attorney and to Patricia. Then I sat with it. I went back through everything I had, every document, every email thread, every vendor file. I was looking for the thing I'd been so focused on, the primary betrayals that I might have walked past. I found it at 2 a.m. on the third night. It was in the Employee Benefits Administration files, an area I'd reviewed quickly because nothing in Diane's operational track record suggested it was a priority. But buried inside a series of routine-looking payroll adjustments over the past 7 months was a pattern. Small redirections, individually, unremarkable, collectively adding up to just under $180,000, routed to an account associated with a benefits administration vendor that had been onboarded without going through the standard procurement process. The account wasn't Diane's. It belonged to someone still inside the company, someone I'd spoken to twice in the past 3 days, someone who had been calm and cooperative throughout the entire review process, which I now understood was because they knew exactly what I was looking for and had kept this particular thing just far enough outside my sightline. I won't name them here. That part is still in the hands of the legal team and now, law enforcement. What I will say is that the discovery of it shifted something in me. I had walked into this thinking it was a story about one person's betrayal, my manager, her arrogance, her carelessness with something my father spent his life building. And it was that, but underneath it was something more complicated. A slow, systemic erosion that had started before Diane, had involved Robert, and had found at least one more willing participant somewhere in the organization. My father knew. That's the part that has stayed with me. In those last weeks, he knew, and he was trying to tell me, and I was too busy grieving forward to listen properly. I've replayed those conversations many times now. The way he would start a sentence and then stop. The way he would start a sentence and then stop. The way he'd look at me like he was trying to gauge whether I was ready. I don't think he doubted me. I think he doubted whether the information would help me or just hurt me, and he ran out of time to figure out which one. I'm sorry I didn't listen better, Dad. I'm handling it now. The formal announcement went out on a Thursday morning, an internal communication to all Callaway employees, signed by Patricia as interim managing partner, outlining the leadership transition and the establishment of an independent oversight committee. It was careful and professional and said nothing directly about what had precipitated it, which was appropriate. There are processes for the rest. My phone had 63 messages by noon. Colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months. A few from people who'd been on that floor the morning Diane told me to clear out my office. Most of them said some version of the same thing. I had no idea. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I understood. I didn't hold it against any of them. When someone with power over your livelihood makes a public example of someone else, the rational response is to keep your head down. That's not cowardice. That's survival. I'd made peace with it. One message was different. It was from a guy named Terrence who'd been 2 desks over from me for 3 years. We'd grabbed lunch together maybe a dozen times. He wasn't a close friend, but he was solid. The kind of person who shows up reliably and doesn't make anything harder than it needs to be. His message said, I almost said something that morning. I want you to know that. I almost stood up. Almost as hard. I know that. I wrote back, next time, stand up. The almost is what eats at you. He sent back a single word, noted. I'm writing this from my father's office. My office now, I suppose, though I'm still getting used to that. The framed photograph that used to sit on his desk is now on mine. It's a picture of the two of us at the opening of the company's second location, back when I was 9 years old. I'm holding a pair of ceremonial scissors and looking extremely serious about it, the way 9-year-olds do when they've been told something is important. He's looking at me instead of the camera. I didn't notice that detail until I was an adult. He was always watching, always assessing, always building something for later. I thought I understood that about him when he was alive. I understand it more now. There are things I want to do differently with this company. The Independent Oversight Committee is the first step, but it's not the last. There are vendor relationships that need restructuring, accountability systems that never existed because they weren't convenient for the people who would have had to design them. There are employees who were undervalued and overlooked because someone with authority over their advancement found them inconvenient. None of that gets fixed in a week. Some of it won't be fixed in a year. But it gets fixed. I had a meeting this morning with the department heads. All of them together for the first time in recent memory. I walked in and sat down and didn't make a speech about vision or culture or fresh starts. I asked one question. What have you needed that nobody would give you? The room was quiet for a moment, in the way rooms are when people aren't sure whether the question is real or rhetorical. Then someone spoke. Then someone else. And then it was hard to slow it down. My father built this company on the belief that the right structure could hold people together even when they disagreed, even when they were afraid, even when the incentives pulled them in different directions. He was right about that, mostly. Where he went wrong was in trusting that the structure would maintain itself without someone watching it. I'm watching it now. The unknown number never sent another message after that first one. My attorney traced it as far as a prepaid device purchased in cash. No further. We don't know who sent it. We may never know. But whoever it was did me a favor. Because they were right. I had missed something. And the something I missed turned out to be the most important piece of the whole picture. Silence isn't just where power hides. It's also where the truth waits for someone to finally sit still long enough to hear it. I'm sitting still now. And I'm listening. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting as long as I did. 14 months of watching, documenting, saying nothing while Diane ran the floor like she owned it. 14 months of performance reviews designed to erase me, vendor contracts being quietly redirected, my father's name slowly being hollowed out from the inside of the company he spent his life building. The honest answer is no. I don't regret a single day of it. Not because I enjoyed it. I didn't. Watching something you love get damaged while you hold yourself back from intervening is one of the harder things I've had to do. But I understood something my father tried to teach me, and that I only really absorbed after he was gone. Patience without purpose is just waiting. But patience with a plan is its own kind of power. Diane didn't lose because I outranked her. She lost because she never stopped to ask why a man she'd been systematically undermining for over a year kept showing up calm. She mistook my silence for weakness. That's the thing about people who rely on intimidation. They fundamentally don't understand composure. They see stillness and read defeat. They never consider that the stillness might be preparation. Robert was different. Robert knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway. That's a harder thing to sit with. He and my father built something together over 20 years, and he looked at that partnership and decided the exit terms mattered more than the relationship. I don't have a simple feeling about Robert. I have something more like grief with a layer of clarity over it. He made his choices. The consequences followed from those choices as directly as anything I've ever seen. That's not punishment from outside. That's just the internal logic of how integrity works. What you hollow out will eventually collapse inward. The thing I keep coming back to is the blue folder I didn't find until 2 a.m. on the third night. The one that told me I had missed something. I'd been so locked onto Diane and Robert that I'd walked right past a slower, quiet or betrayal happening inside the organization, and that taught me something I think is worth carrying forward. The most dangerous threats aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes the thing that will undo everything you've built is sitting in a routine payroll file at 2 a.m., waiting for someone patient enough to find it. My father watched. He always watched. He built this company on the belief that the right structure, maintained by honest people, could survive almost anything. He was right about the structure. Where he needed help was in the watching. I'm the watching now. I don't know what kind of leader I'll be yet. I've been in this office for less than 2 weeks. But I know the question I'm going to keep asking. The one I asked in that first department head meeting that suddenly made a quiet room very loud. What have you needed that nobody would give you? That question isn't management strategy. It's a debt I owe to every person in that building who kept their head down because the cost of speaking up felt too high. I know what that cost feels like. I watched it from 2 desks for over a year. Intelligence without integrity is just a sharper tool for causing damage. Resilience without honesty is just endurance for its own sake. The only combination that actually builds anything worth keeping is when you know what's right, you do the hard work to understand the full picture, and you hold yourself to it even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. That's what my father's watch on my wrist means to me every morning when I put it on. Not that I won, that I showed up the way he would have wanted me to.